Okay.
Wonderful. So before I hand it over to you for housekeeping, Kimberly, I'll just welcome everybody, both commissioners and members of the public. This is our Legal Services Trust Fund Homelessness Prevention Fund Committee meeting. And we're calling the meeting to order today, June 13th at 1:03 p.m. And now we'll note that our recording has started, and we'll ask Kimberly if she can go over our housekeeping items, please.
Thank you. Welcome committee members, liaisons, and members of the public to the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission Homelessness Prevention Funds Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us. We are using Zoom with the goal to foster a more inclusive environment and effective meeting. If you would like to comment during the meeting, please use the raise hand feature. Please utilize this tool to virtually indicate that you would like to speak in order to help the chair facilitate the discussion. A friendly reminder, this is a video conference and please be aware of the surroundings behind you. All LSTFC and committee meetings will be recorded and posted to the State Bar's website. Zoom captioning is available. To enable, select live transcript at the bottom of your Zoom screen, then select enable transcript. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Appreciate that. And now we'll ask if there are any members of the public present and wishing to provide comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ephraim. Is
Oh,
it
I'm
okay
sorry.
with you?
Yes,
Go
please
ahead.
call roll. My apologies.
No problem. Thank you. Ali Khani is absent. Iskin.
Here.
Mahoney.
Here.
Sandville.
Here.
Escobedo.
Here.
We have 4 members present and 1 absent, so we do have quorum.
Thank you for that, and thank you, members, for being present today. Kimberly, now, do we have any members of the public wishing to provide public comment?
No one is indicating they would like to speak.
Great, thank you. So with that, we will check back again before we jump into any discussion and action items. But for now, we'll move us on to item number 3 on
I'm so sorry, Ephraim. I completely forgot to do the attendance for the for our liaisons and for our staff. Would it be okay with you if I did that now?
Please do.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
Thanks. So in terms of liaisons for Judicial Council, I see Melanie Snyder and Laura Brown. And
Here.
Thank you. And for LAC, I see Lauren Klein. And I'm not sure if I see anyone else from LAC. Oh, I believe Zach Newman is in the attendee pool. Okay. And then for our staff, I am seeing Kim Wormsley, Shannon Crosley, Dwan Nguyen, Esteban Cano Gutierrez, Heidi Slater, Raul Duran from General Counsel, and myself. Thank you again, Ephraim.
No worries. Thank you for catching that, Jennifer. Item number 3 on our agenda is approval of our minutes. So they were provided in the agenda, and I will ask if folks have any questions or corrections in the minutes before we entertain a motion to approve our minutes.
I'll move approval.
Thank you, Eric. Do we
I'll
have a
second.
second? Thank you. Jennifer, may you call the vote, please?
Yes, with pleasure. Ali Khani is absent. Iskin.
Yes.
Mahoney.
Yes.
Sandville.
Yes.
Escobedo.
Yes.
With the vote of 4 yeses and 1 absent, the motion passes.
Thank you. So item number 4 is an update item. So it's informational, non-voting, and it is an update on our homelessness prevention grants administration. And Jennifer, I will hand it over to you for our staff presentation on this item.
Thank you so much. So let me share my screen. All right. So my name is Jennifer. I am the committee coordinator and a lead program analyst in our office. And I will be joined today by my colleague Esteban, who is a senior program analyst in our office as well. So just to go through the agenda, I'll briefly discuss the HP3 Quarter 10 Services Report. This was released on June 4th, and it will be due July 2nd. The HP3 annual evaluation was released on June 7th. Staff hosted a webinar for grantees earlier today to go over those reporting requirements. The HP3 Department of Finance audit is ongoing. As a reminder, this is an audit that the Department of Finance is conducting of the Judicial Council and the State Bar. State Bar staff continue to work with the Department of Finance on this audit, including at the moment, interfacing with grantees whom the Department of Finance has selected to test. It's a very thorough audit. So we're trying to be as responsive as possible to the Department of Finance, and we will keep you posted on that. And the last item for this agenda item is the HP2 grant closeout update. And I'm going to pass things over to my colleague Esteban to give this update.
Thank you, Jennifer. So my name is Esteban Cano. I'm a senior financial analyst with the Office of Access and Inclusion, and I'm going to be presenting a quick HP2 grant closeout update. So as you can see in this table here on this slide, for HP2 Formula 70 59 out of our 70 grantees successfully completed the grant. For RFP 11 out of 12. 3 for Formula, 3 of those haven't spent funds that total $54,048. CCWRO is actually one of them with $32,878. For RFP, none of them have unspent funds. And finally, 9 grantees for Formula have budget deviations, about 10%, who did not request a budget modification. For RFP, only 1. And we're currently working with, with the program to get explanations of why those organizations did not submit budget deviations. And the idea is by the next meeting, staff will bring an action item to make determinations regarding those deviations. That's pretty much it. Do you guys have any questions?
I see
All right.
Eric.
What does successfully completed the grant mean?
They were able to, they either provided budget deviations, they either request a budget modification if they have budget deviation, or they completed the whole grant without having any unspent funds, actually.
Can I just add to that also, in addition to what Esteban is talking about, in this case, successfully completed the grant means that they've submitted their final HP2 annual evaluation and staff has reviewed it and all questions have been answered.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Sure.
All right, if there is any other questions, I will just pass it back to you, Jennifer, so you can continue with the presentation.
Thank you. And I'm happy also if anyone has questions about the other brief updates that I gave. Okay. Efrain, that's it for this agenda item. Would you like me to continue to the next item?
Yes, would you, is it all on the same PowerPoint, or are you able to stop sharing screen and then we can?
It is on the same PowerPoint,
Okay,
but I
good.
can stop sharing screen
So-
if you'd like.
No, that's fine. It's no need. So we see the item posted. Thank you for progressing the PowerPoint. So this next item is an action item. And this is an action item on CCWRO, Coalition of California Welfare Rights Organizations, 2021 through 2024 HP3 formula grant. Today, staff will be reviewing and providing a report and action recommendation regarding the grant, and particularly concluding some of the updates we've received around working with the organization and around its reporting and compliance, and our final findings and staff action on that work. So as we go through it, we'll allow staff to make their presentation. We'll ask that we hold our questions until after the presentation, and then we could have a discussion, ask questions, and at the appropriate time, call for a motion. Before we do that, Jennifer, I know we had asked at the top of the agenda about public comment. Because this is an action item, just want to, Kimberly, ask again, are there any members of the public wishing to speak on this final item in our agenda?
We have one person just raised their hand. Hold on, I'll let them speak.
All right, we'll unmute them and remind them that we're provide a three-minute comment period. So please go ahead, Kimberly.
You should be able to speak now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is Kevin Aslanian. I'm not going to take 3 minutes. We met with Heidi today, and we're working on trying to take to rectify some stuff, and we'll get back to you. We appreciate staff cooperation. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, Jennifer and Heidi, you may proceed with the item.
Thank you. So yes, I'll be joined for this item by Heidi Slater, who's the acting program manager in our office. So we'll go over some background, then we'll review CCWRO's submitted materials. We'll discuss the federal requirements that are applicable. We'll talk about a breakdown of CCWRO's HP3 funds received versus allowed costs, and then we'll present the proposed resolution. So for background, staff identified a number of significant issues with CCWRO's HP2 and HP3 formula awards, namely that they failed to segregate activities and expenditures for these grants. They didn't track actual expenditures by grant. They reported and potentially double counted the same work for both grants, and they reported and expended funds on non-qualifying work. Staff identified these issues in the spring of 2023, and we identified these problems in a number of different ways. We reviewed CCWRO's grants through the HP2 and 3 services and spending reviews that we do for all grantees. And these concerns also arose out of CCWRO's HP3 desk review, which resulted in a corrective action plan, and CCWRO's regular triennial monitoring visit. Staff has provided significant TA, as we've discussed, to the with the committee, and as you saw from Kevin's comment, TA to the organization is ongoing. In addition to discussing these issues with the Homelessness Prevention Funds Committee, these issues have also been raised with the Eligibility and Budget Review Committee and with the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission as a whole. These committees and the commission passed a series of resolutions to try to get CCWRO to come into compliance with its HP3 grant. Recently, on March 29th, the commission passed a resolution that determined that CCWRO did not satisfy the commission's previous December resolution and remained non-compliant with federal grant requirements. Additionally, the resolution required CCWRO to submit documentation monthly beginning January 2024 in order to receive its remaining HP3 funds through a reimbursement model until the commission found CCWRO to come into full compliance. Also required CCWRO to revise its HP3 formula grant on the Q9 expenditure report that we've been talking about, these quarterly expenditure reports as a process of remedying errors. They also required CCWRO to provide revised, accurate, and complete documentation, including allocation reports, accounting reports, spend down plan, and budget revision, and required CCWRO to participate in a second HP3 desk review in 2024. We discussed all of these requirements on May 20th with the committee, as well as staff's ongoing concerns and question costs related to the materials CCWRO had submitted by the April 26th deadline for that resolution. Specifically, staff found that CCWRO's timesheets were still inaccurate and for two staff reflected budgeted time by using formulas rather than reflecting actual time. Staff requested additional supporting documents from CCWRO in order to finalize its analysis and calculations of the question costs, and these materials were due May 24th. So today we'll be talking about staff's analysis of the materials due May 24th. But before we get to that, I did want to update the committee as well on the Eligibility and Budget Review Committee's side of the equation, which met yesterday and is also doing some ongoing review of CCWRO. So last year, CCWRO participated in an eligibility review conference to discuss concerns about its internal controls and quality controls related both to its IOLTA EAF eligibility, but also its HP grants were a factor. As you'll recall, the commission ultimately found CCWRO eligible for funding with conditions. Some of the relevant conditions were CCWRO submitting complete, timely, and accurate reports for all grants, and submitting complete, timely, and accurate documentation of successfully implementing its HP3 corrective action plan. Yesterday, the Eligibility and Budget Review Committee discussed CCWRO in some detail. Specifically, there will be an additional eligibility review conference for CCWRO this year in the coming months. The committee also discussed possibly asking a member of the HP Funds Committee to join. So if anyone is interested, please let me know. But that's kind of an update of the background. And I will turn things over to Heidi now to review the May 24th materials.
Jennifer, before you do that,
Yes.
I didn't see that. I know that's a real-time update. As we move and go into the recommended action from staff, can you just tell us a little bit, the update you just gave, are we to in any way consider that as a part of background that factors into what we're looking at, or is it just an update to let us know what the other committee's doing with regard to this organization? That's
a great question. It's just an update to keep the commissioners of this committee informed about what the other committee is doing. We received a request from a commissioner to provide that update, so they had a holistic understanding of what's going on.
Great, thanks for clarifying.
Sure.
All right, sorry, Heidi. Go ahead.
No worries. Thank you, everybody. So as Jennifer mentioned, we had determined prior to the last committee meeting that there were expenditures that we would be recommending disallowing. But in order to calculate that amount, we needed additional supporting documentation from CCWRO. And so they have complied with that request and did provide to the office all of that documentation prior to the deadline of March 24th. Staff has done a thorough review of everything that they have provided and has done calculations to determine a recommended amount for disallowed costs based on the primary issues that are identified on this slide. The first being, well, the biggest one being that the executive director and the directing attorney's timesheets were determined not to have adequately reported actual time worked on the project for 2022 and 2023, despite several efforts to communicate that that was the requirement. Instead, they remain formulaic and based on budgeted totals instead of actual time worked. And so we are therefore recommending disallowing those costs. In addition, once all of the supporting documentation was provided, it was determined that there was no the timesheets provided for the attorney who provided services in December of 2021 did not have any supporting documentation for any work done on HP3. And so because of that, we also disallowed the expenditures related to that month. There are still some outstanding issues and concerns that I met with, as Kevin mentioned, I met with CCWRO's Executive Director, Kevin, this morning, and their consulting accountant to discuss some outstanding issues that are impeding my ability to finalize the number. So the number we are suggesting today is a recommendation that is subject to change pending some final information. So that number should be known prior to the board meeting or the Legal Service Trust Fund Commission meeting next week. So part of the issue stems from how their general ledger is set up, and it sort of needs there's some journal entries that exist in there that are impacting how much each individual category has in it each month, and that need to be explained in order to know how best to calculate those numbers for the allocation purposes. And so I have given, we met this morning, and the accountant is going to provide me with that final information so that we can make that final determination before the commission meeting. I expect that it may lower the number of disallowed costs identified, but that is yet to be determined. There's also the possibility that it could increase them, but there's just a couple issues as it relates to their non-personnel expenditures and their employee benefit expenditures, and how their general ledger reports those expenditures that need some clarifying explanations. In addition to the things mentioned above, a part of the challenge of reviewing their documentation is that they have several areas where they are reporting costs in the wrong categories. And so some of that is having to, work with them to get them to realign those cost categories so that they're more in line with the definitions as we understand them for cost categories. For example, some of their accounting expenses and other administrative support expenses were charged to, organizational services to clients, and so that's the wrong cost category, and so it should be moved. And so I'm working with the staff with the CCWRO accountant to realign those and put them in the proper categories. And then the last thing is what I sort of mentioned before here. The numbers that they use for their allocation worksheets do not necessarily match their general ledger totals. And so that's where I need some final explanations in their non-personnel and employee benefits categories so that we can make the final determination. Next slide, Jennifer. So by way of reviewing the federal requirements that are in play here and how we're making these determinations is this is the section Title II CFR section 200 .430 subsection 1, and this is the requirement in the CFR for supporting documentation for personnel expenditures. And this is the code section for which we are relying on the requirements here in order to make the determination about the disallowed expenditures as it relates to the personnel expenditures. And the requirement is that the charges for federal awards, for which HP3 is one, the salaries and wages must be based upon records that accurately reflect the time worked, and it goes into the various conditions that are required to support that. And while it does allow for budgeted estimates, those are fine in a temporary basis, as long as there is a system for correcting that on an ongoing basis. And CCWRO has been using a budgeted basis for their executive director and their directing attorney, but there has not been any correction or true up for those expenditures as required in this section of the CFR. And that's why the determination has been made to disallow those costs. Moving to the next slide. There is also a provision in the CFR that allows for organizations to recoup indirect costs based on an indirect de minimis rate of 10%. So in our calculation that we have done, while we've disallowed the expenditures related to the personnel for the 2 employees mentioned, which then is at a trickle down effect on the expenditures allowed for the non-personnel expenditures, we have added back in a 10% de minimis calculation based on their direct expenditures, so that will allow them to recoup some of the expenditures that are being disallowed at the top. So this is the code section, or the regulation that allows for that. Next section, or next slide, Jennifer. And so this is the current calculation that we are using to determine which of the expenditures we're disallowing. And so just by way of explanation, this column B here is what they have submitted as their allocation, for HP3. And column C is what their actual general ledger report. So you'll notice in the highlighted section, there are some discrepancies between the amounts that were used or that were reported on their allocation worksheet versus the amounts that are reported in their general ledger. So for the purposes of our analysis, we are using the general ledger totals, so that we're using the official accounting record as opposed to that. So you can disregard column B in here, but we just wanted to demonstrate that this is part of the discrepancies that we've been struggling to reconcile. So column D here is our recalculation of their expenditures based upon what documentation they provided that we can validate and is supported. So in column D, you'll see that they have provided documentation to support $113,000 in personnel costs for salary, whereas their general ledger has reported $167,000. So that leads us to that column E, which is the amount that we're saying is being disallowed because it's not supported. So that's currently we're saying $53,000 and $172 in personnel salary costs will be disallowed based on this analysis. And then you can sort of column E, following all the way down is how much we are disallowing of the expenditures that they have reported in their general.
So Heidi, wait, column E is what? Column D minus B minus D or C minus D? What is it?
So column C is what their general ledger has reported for their HP expenditures. So column D is what we, through our analysis, are able to support of their expenditures. So column E is C minus D.
Okay, so so if we go to the bottom line.
So at this point, as of today, we are recommending disallowing $75,209 from their reported expenditures.
Okay, which is like the 236, 635 minus 161, 426.
Correct. That's correct. And so the one asterisk I will put on this is the numbers reported from the disallowed expenditures in employee benefits through the non-personnel expenditures. I do expect there to be some changes to that once I have the final analysis from their accountant, who is going to provide that to me by Monday. So I do have the anticipation that the $75,000 number may be reduced once we've reviewed that, because there are some there's some unusual their accounting system is the way they've documented certain expenditures and liabilities. They're a little commingled in their accounting system in a way that we have to sort of segregate out. And I need more information in order to be able to do that final analysis. So I do, just based on my conversation with them this morning and their understanding and my understanding, I do expect that that $75,000 may go down a little bit, because like employee benefits, for example, I do think that in column D, they're under allocated based on, but I think some of that has to do with some journal entries that relate to how they are recognizing vacation accruals and employee taxes that need to be corrected. So that's a little too in the weeds, but so there is still a final determination that we need to make in our office, and because of a variety of different reasons, we haven't been able to do that officially, but we're 95% of the way there. And so I do anticipate that at the meeting for the Legal Service Trust Fund Commission, we will have a final number available for that. But as of today, the number we're operating under is that $75,000, $209 disallowing of costs. And so I will pause there and open it up if anybody has any questions about this analysis, or I can turn it back to Jennifer.
Well, that was, Eric, your question was helpful, so I appreciate it. So just to kind of summarize and get your sort of thumbs up or thumbs down on this, Heidi. So sort of as we're looking at this, staff is recommending disallowance of $75,209. And what you're saying is that that's what we are currently at this time, with all the material information we have in our analysis, what per guidelines and laws is what we need to disallow. We are in ongoing communication and ongoing analysis with CCWRO to where there is an ability to cure some of these costs still between now and the meeting. And so we're leaving that open so that if we do need to revise that because they're able to cure some stuff, they will. Is that?
That is correct. And just to give that part of this is their account has been unavailable for, an approved excuse, if you will, for lack of a better way of saying it. So that's why we haven't been able to get the final number today, but she's made herself available now. And so I do fully expect to have it by the end of next week before the Legal Services Trust Commission meeting. So,
Great.
So yeah, that is a fair summary.
Thank you. Thank you. So colleagues, any questions on these numbers in the analysis? We'll, after we get any clarifications, we need to make sure we all understand these numbers. Jennifer will proceed and then take us into what is the actual resolution that they are bringing before us for our action. But on this table in these numbers, are there any additional questions? And again, Eric, thanks for your question about what is that column E we're looking at? Other clarifying questions from members?
I see Jonathan has his
Jonathan,
hand up.
I see you. Yes, please.
Yes. So Heidi, yeah, it makes sense what you're saying about the employee benefits and the salary, that possibly shifting with additional information. But do you have a sense of if there's anything else that might shift significantly with more data? Like I'm looking at the contracts to clients and other things where there are larger variances. Will that likely shift? How do you have a sense of by what percentage will the 75,000 go down or change?
So so there are a few key areas here that have big journal entries that need to be explained in order to sort of, one is employee benefits. I believe space might be one of them. The difference between contract to clients and contract to orgs, that really is about a miscoding. So the contract to clients really should have come under the contract to org conversation. And so that's part of that difference. And so the other things are, you know, they're I think the big places are employee benefits, and the other stuff isn't as significant, won't shift as significantly, although it will have a trickle down effect once we sort of have those things. The other thing is they have provided information that they do have supporting documentation for December of 2021 that they would like to submit and be considered. So if that happens, then that potentially brings in some additional money for another month of. So my preliminary analysis, if I were to use sort of the allocation numbers that they used originally, that they provided, it took the disallowed cost down to like $59,000. So it actually reduced it a little bit. So I'm you know, not having the opportunity to evaluate those two, I expect the number of disallowed costs to be somewhere between that 59,000 and 75,000 mark, you know, with a little grace for that prediction, you know, that depending upon what they submit in the end, will make that ultimate determination of that amount. Yes, Dwan?
Heidi, just so we're clear procedurally, because you don't have a final number to recommend. You will have, though, because the commission meeting is next Friday, so that the commission votes on it, right? So procedurally, the committee won't be able to see that number again, but they're voting in kind of concept while you finalize it, and then you'll present to the full commission with the final number.
That is correct. The way we have sort of framed the resolution, it sort of does so with the understanding that this is a preliminary number that we do expect to change based on this final analysis. So that was the best we could do, and that it would be presented verbally during the trust fund commission meeting next, or on the 21st, I believe. And so that so they, you know, that we're asking this commission to consider the disallowed cost with the 75,000, with the caveat that number may change, or will change probably. You know, I think it's certain that it will change.
Thanks for that. Any other clarifying questions from members? Seeing none. Jennifer, do you want to take us through the rest of the slides?
Thank you. Will do. Okay, so we just wanted to go over some more of the federal requirements that underlie staff's recommendations. And we've discussed these before. So very briefly, 2 CFR section 200.208 states that if the state bar determines that a grantee has failed to comply with grant conditions, the state bar can impose additional conditions to secure compliance. And these conditions include requiring payments as reimbursements, requiring additional, more detailed financial reports, requiring additional project monitoring, requiring the grantee to obtain technical or management assistance, and establishing additional prior approvals. So as a reminder, the commission has already imposed all of these additional conditions through its previous resolutions, and CCWRO has still not come into compliance. As a result, staff do not recommend reverting CCWRO's remaining HP3 formula grant allocation to a lump sum payment, and instead recommend that CCWRO receive its remaining HP3 formula funds through monthly reimbursements, in keeping with this section of the CFR. Additionally, we wanted to just mention 2 CFR section 200.339, which states that if the state bar determines that noncompliance cannot be remedied by those additional conditions, the state bar may take further steps appropriate, which could include disallowing funds, withholding cash payments pending correction of the deficiency, and or wholly suspending or terminating the grant. So as Heidi mentioned, pursuant to this section of the CFR, staff currently recommend disallowing $75,209 in costs, which we've acknowledged this number may change prior to the commission meeting on June 21st. Additionally, CCWRO will need to correct its expenditures on the quarter 10 expenditure report to remove the disallowed costs once that number is finalized and reflect only its actual expenditures. It must also correct costs categories to reflect actual expenditures. So those were the discrepancies in line items that Heidi discussed. And that is due on July 31st for all grantees. CCWRO must also update its submitted budget modification to match the corrected line item expenditures. As we've discussed, staff have provided extensive technical assistance to CCWRO and given the organization numerous opportunities to correct these compliance issues. Because these issues persist, staff have determined there are no additional conditions to impose on CCWRO to remedy these issues. Staff will continue to provide technical assistance, as is evidenced by the fact that we did so this morning. If CCWRO continues to fail to fully comply with all grant requirements, however, staff may still recommend termination, although we are hopeful that that will not be the case. And now I'll pass things back to Heidi for a breakdown of CCWRO's funds received versus allowed costs.
Okay, so what this chart shows you is that CCWRO was awarded $442,044 in HP3 grant funds over the term of December 21 through December 2024. Each year, they for the year 1 and year 2, they did receive grant payments in the amount of $147,348 in year 1 and year 2. They have not been paid any grant funds for year 3 as of yet, although the final breakdown of grant funds available is that same $147,000 for the 3rd year. Based on the analysis staff has done, their expenditures for the 1st year was $78,808, leaving an unspent balance from year 1 of $69,300. In year 2, their expenditures currently stand at $83,418, leaving an unspent balance of $63,890. So that's a combined total of $161,426 unspent through year 1 and 2. So as we enter year 3, they are currently on a reimbursement model. They have withdrawn their reimbursement requests and are resubmitting those based on a new, a corrected understanding of the timesheet. So they have given me the timesheets, but they need to still do the full analysis breakdown from January through May. So I'm pending that. So we do not know yet what their 2024 expenditures are through May. Although I anticipate to get that number soon, have that soon. So under the current plan where they move to reimbursement model, staff is recommending that they be required to apply their 2024 reimbursement requests against the unspent funds that they already have, so that as each invoice comes in for each of the months in December or in 2024, it would be applied against that unspent balance, which currently is at 161, and it wouldn't be until they had spent all of those year 1 and year 2 funds that then they would start being issued new payments for any of the grant funds available in 2024. That decision was made because they have CCWRO has failed to expend their funds per their grant agreement, and as pursuant to the CFR that Jennifer just cited, 200.339A, we are recommending withholding additional payments until they do spend down their unspent funds that they've previously received.
Heidi, can I just interject really quickly?
Yes.
Just to clarify, I believe that they've expended $161,426.
Oh, did I? I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you.
So their unspent funds is currently $147,348.
Wait,
No. Their unspent funds from year 1 and 2 is $133,270. They have 147 available for year 3 as well. So
okay.
So I'm sorry. I looked at the wrong
column.
note. I apologize. So they have $133,000 left unspent from year 1 and 2, and then they have another 147 available for year 3. So until they've been paid year 1 and 2. So until that 133 is claimed through their 2024 expenditures, we are not recommending sending out any new checks because we are concerned that they may not, if we were to send out more money, then we would just have more money to reclaim at the end of the grant, because based on current spending trends, they may not be able to, claim that full 133. So that's why we're recommending applying 2024 invoices against that money already received.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I'll turn it over to you now.
Sure. So next we have the proposed resolutions, but Ephraim, I'll pause here if you want to take any comments.
I think folks were asking questions, but I don't know, last call on any clarifying questions for this table or these numbers?
I just have one. Yeah. The table's clear, but how will, and your proposal to have them draw down the unspent funds is also clear and makes sense. How are we going to take the disallowance? How does that get taken? Do they have to pay money back, or are we going to take that out of their reimbursement request? How's that going to work?
So we will ask them to correct their expenditures to date. So that's where the column here is their allowed expenditures, and so that's how we're getting to they have 133 left in unspent funds through the first 2 years.
You mean so the disallowance is baked into that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So the only time we ask for the return of funds is at the end of the grant year. So we are just making an adjustment to the expenditures they've reported against the expenditure or the grant that they've received. And so these unspent funds in the last column are sort of those have the disallowed costs deducted from them or added to them. So this sort of balances the books, if you will, in terms of they've got $280,000 that hasn't been spent as of today, not taking into account that they have January through May charges that we haven't added to this table.
So the correction, Eric, for now will happen on the quarter 10 expenditure report that I mentioned previously. But as Heidi said, we don't ask for return of funds at this time because there is still time to spend down the grant.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. Okay, why don't we move to the resolutions? I'll have you present it and then you can hand it back to me so we could queue it up for our discussion.
Sounds good. So this is a long resolution. I'm happy to read it out loud if you would like. Okay.
Yes.
Should the committee concur with staff's proposal, passage of the following resolution is recommended. Resolved that the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission Homelessness Prevention Funds Committee determines that the materials submitted by Coalition of California Welfare Rights Organizations do not satisfy the resolution passed by the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission on March 29, 2024, and CCWRO remains non-compliant with federal grant requirements. And it is further resolved that the committee recommends continuing to require CCWRO to submit allocation reports and staff timesheets each month in order to receive its remaining 2021 to 2024 homelessness prevention or HP3 formula funds through monthly reimbursement. CCWRO must receive its remaining HP3 formula funds through reimbursement. CCWRO may only receive reimbursement for HP3 formula grant expenditures in 2024 after it fully expends all funds it received for its year 1 and 2 HP3 formula grant payments as described in staff's memo dated June 13, 2024, or an updated number provided by staff prior to or during the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission meeting on June 21st, 2024. And it is further resolved that the committee recommends requiring CCWRO to adjust its expenditure reports to back out the disallowed costs as described in staff's memo, currently $75,209, dated June 13, 2024, or an updated number provided by staff prior to or during the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission meeting on June 21st, 2024. And it is further resolved that the committee recommends requiring CCWRO to revise its HP3 formula grant on the quarter 10 expenditure report due July 31st, 2024 to reflect actual expenditures through June 30th, 2024. And it is further resolved that the committee recommends requiring CCWRO to correct its previously submitted budget revision request for its HP3 formula funding to staff by June 30th, 2024. And it is further resolved that the analysis staff have conducted, in addition to staff's ongoing review of reimbursement expenditures, satisfies the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission requirement for CCWRO to participate in a second HP3 desk review in 2024.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for that. And I know it was long, so thank you for reading it. I think that's a good way we make sure we cover and fully comprehend what is in our the resolution before us. Colleagues, we have an action before us. I want to thank staff for the thorough memo and particularly the clear data on this. I want to also share as we look at, I know a lot of our time memo was on the disallowed costs. But as you can see, this is really about using those disallowed costs to really adjust what is available, what needs to be discounted, and then how things are to be expended and reported. And so before us here today is not just the action on this memo, but in general, the different actions staff need to continue to work with CCWRO, keep the state bar in our work in compliance as well. So what is not here is again, this is not a sort of, move to cancel the contract, to collect any type of monies to prevent CCWRO from doing their work. It's adjusting what is available, what is being spent to continue to keep us in compliance with what 2 CFR requires in terms of what's available, what expenses can be allowed and disallowed. So I wanted to frame that for us for our discussion, to note that that is really the part of the process that we're taking action on. And also to make note that staff is available for us to ask questions and clarify things, and staff is also the point of contact and available to continue to work with CCWRO after these actions, right? So when we take these actions, staff is still working with them as they've shared. And so for us to keep that in mind, I share that because I think we want to be able to consider this action and know that if there is any question about what work might come after that, what CCWRO has or doesn't have, or what questions might remain, that we can present that to staff, but really focus on our action here as presented in the resolution. So with that, I'd like to see if there's any points of discussion, but myself say that my discussion with staff recommend that we really consider this action, take that action today that's being recommended, and like that, these are all things that are not about our processes, but are federal requirements of how we need to be administering our work. So with that recommendation, I want to open it up for questions on the text in the resolution, comments, or other points for discussion from members. I don't see. Eric, you're off mute. Are you trying to chime in or you're just off mute?
No.
Okay, okay. If there are not any questions or comments, I would entertain a motion to approve the resolution as presented by staff today.
I move to accept the proposed resolution by staff.
I'll second.
Thank you, Eric. Jennifer, may you call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Alikani is absent. Iskin,
Yes.
Mahoney,
Yes.
Sandville,
Yes.
Escobedo.
Yes.
With a vote of 4 yes and 1 absence, this motion carries.
So, Efren, can I ask a question?
Yes, please, Eric.
Yeah, I didn't want to get in the way of enacting this carefully thought out resolution. I think it's fine. But Mike, I'm just a little, want to be sure I understand this. So the detailed rack up that we saw that resulted in 75,000 in recommended disallowed costs, subject to some possible further adjustments. What period of time does that take us to? Is that December 31, 2023?
Yes, that's through 2023. They have expenditures that will start with January in 2024. They had previously submitted them, but then based on further conversations and understanding, I gave them the opportunity to withdraw those reimbursement requests and resubmit based on a different understanding. And so they have started that process. I have received the corrected timesheets from Kevin and Grace, their directing attorney. I have the timesheets of their other attorney. I'm just now waiting for them to recalculate the allocations based on the non-personnel expenditures and resubmit that. So that will bring us through May of 2024.
All right, so I guess the gist of my question is, I take it from all that we at this moment, we don't really know if they have fixed their accounting situation, so to speak, to the point where it's good. In other words, we don't know yet whether the reports for 2024 are going to be accurate or useful or acceptable. Yeah, useful, acceptable.
I have reviewed the timesheets they've submitted. I gave them a revised timesheet with a template for which they could use for their allocation methodology. So I am optimistic that they are better equipped now to do that analysis on a month-to-month basis. Of course, we will be doing a very thorough review of each of those expenditures before we validate them as allowable. So I am really hoping that we have turned the corner, and I had a very positive conversation this morning with their accountant who, has only been with them for, part of last year. So she's really, she is taking the effort. She is making efforts, and she's got a lot of work ahead of her, but they are taking positive steps, and they do seem to be, based on the timesheets that they submitted, I am more comfortable with those starting with in January. So I knock on wood, I hope I'm hoping that we don't have to have further conversations about disallowed costs.
No,
through
so
2024.
am I. So am I.
Yeah.
Eric, you probably learned more about 2 CFR and disallowed costs than you care to know, right?
That is one thing that could be said, yes, among many others. Yeah.
That might be true of all of us, I would argue. But so I am cautiously optimistic that 2024 will look different.
Thanks for that, Heidi. Other comments or questions? Thanks for that, Eric. Want to see if others have any other comments or questions. Great. Well, I just want to, before we move to adjourn, just thank Heidi and Jennifer for all of your work, your collaboration with the committee. I'll share with you, colleagues, they've been great about briefing me step by step, kind of what's coming in, what's not, what are upcoming conversations, so that I can share with you all, their communication has been really good and kind of keeping our committee informed about what they're working on and how things are progressing. So just want to acknowledge that and say thanks for that. I appreciate it. And you know, I don't know if he's still on the line, but you know, despite the tough journey for CCWRO, I also want to appreciate that they continue to show up and be available and make sure they are stepping up and present as a partner as we go through these conversations and take these actions. So want to just appreciate that too. And with that, will move us to adjournment, which is the final item on our agenda.
Well, we can definitely adjourn now. I do want to acknowledge that Kevin does have his hand raised. I would defer to you, Ephraim.
Kevin, why don't you close us out and then we can adjourn.
I just want to let you know, you all have a nice weekend. I just want to let you know, still here, it's still kicking. Thank you.
All right, we appreciate that. We'll stick with you, you stick with us, and appreciate you trusting the process. So thank you.
Get this. Don't worry about it.
All right.
Thanks.
All right,
Okay,
with that,
bye.
we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy your afternoon and evening. Bye.